in philosophy there is a lot of debate, where is the mind located? And the traditional view, of course, where you had a soul outside time and space that somehow interacted with the brain through the pineal gland, that was the René Descartes idea, well, that has become a bit untenable. But at least there is a kind of view that, well, it might be just inside the brain. However, there are externalists like Putnam who said, no, actually, we're putting part of our cognition is going on outside our brains. Part of our environment is involved in this. And the kind of right now the most famous and hotly debated current philosophical view about this is the extended cognition hypothesis of Clark and Chalmers. So they have a little example about Otto's diary. Sorry? Ah, so they have a little example about Otto's diary. Otto has bad memory because of Alzheimer's, but he writes down everything he needs in his diary. So when he needs to know where to go or where the location is, he just looks it up in his diary. Now, Chalmers and Clark, they argue that, well, if something is taken the part of a process that if it was going on inside a brain, we wouldn't hesitate to call thinking or cognition, then it should also count when it's going on outside a brain. So when Otto remembers where something is by looking in the diary, that is actually makes the diary part of his mind. This is going a little bit further than Putnam, because it seems that Chalmers and Clark even think that there might be some kind of experience going on. It's not just that there is information there, but it might be part of experience of remembering for Otto to use his diary. And this, I think, is a bit controversial, but it also leads to a lot of interesting things. I had a very interesting experience in this sense with Wikipedia. I didn't know a while ago how often I was using Wikipedia until I went to China and suddenly discovered that it was censored. I couldn't get access to Wikipedia. And this made me aware of how often I was looking up things in Wikipedia. Before that, it was a completely unconscious act. I was checking words, I was checking references, I was trying to, well, probably just wasting a lot of time. But I didn't notice that. It was apparently part of my extended cognition. But I was not aware until, thanks to the Chinese government, it forced me to notice this activity by preventing it. Similarly, Otto might actually not notice how much his diary means to his thinking unless he loses it. And the interesting problem with this is, of course, that, well, these extensions can really affect the way of thinking we can do. For example, a diary is very good for noting down certain kinds of things like short notes, addresses, but not enormous amounts of information. It cannot do animations. And the Wikipedia is good for certain things and not others. So the external tool we put our cognition into can actually affect our thinking quite a lot. And this is a bit scary when you think about it in terms of moral philosophy, because our moral cognition, thinking about what is right or wrong, what we should be doing, is also framed. The system we're using is actually framing our agency. So you can imagine, for example, an airline pilot. His options are going to be affected by the tools around him, the sensors in the cockpit. And as Jeroen van der Hoven at Delft University pointed out, this makes actually designers to be choice architects. By designing a cockpit for a plane or a user interface of a computer program, they actually determine what is going to be easy to make as decisions, what's going to be hard to find out, and that's going to affect how people behave. So in many cases we are completely dependent on our systems. Right now, for example, outside my window it's a beautiful day and I cannot tell whether there is any kind of volcanic ash in the sky or not. I'm dependent on using the internet to hear what other people and authorities are saying. And they are using various instruments. No human is right now, except those on Iceland, really experiencing the ash that is keeping the flights grounded. We're all dependent on that our sensors and the distribution of information from these sensors is accurate and correct. If it turns out that for some reason these sensors are misaligned and they're telling us there is ash up in the sky when there is none, well, we're going to make a big mistake. But how much effort do we put into checking whether our sensors are right? Well, right now the airline industry is so concerned, of course, about lost profits. So they're of course going to work rather hard to keep people checking them. But in many other situations, we become very dependent on our devices and external cognition. And this puts a lot of interesting obligations onto the designers. We can of course also extend things more personally. So to the left we have one of those wonderful diagrams from Flood's treatise about how he believed our thinking was going on, where of course a lot of extended cognition is going on in our higher self, an exoself, something outside our normal sense of personhood that is existing in some other reality. To the right we got a younger and a slightly nerdier version of me. Well, actually, no, I think I'm equally nerdy now, wearing a little low-tech wearable computer. Quite often we offload our thinking onto external objects. And we're extremely good at this as a species. It's not just that we're doing it occasionally, we're doing it all the time. And these exoselves are very important for us. Without my glasses, I wouldn't be very effective. Without my cell phone, well, again, the cell phone is becoming a ridiculously important part of our life. We're building an external system that is closely tied to ourselves. Our clothes adapt to our shape of our body and our habits, both because we buy clothes that fit it, but also because the clothes change to fit it. And conversely, we change to fit the clothes. My shoes are shaping my feet and vice versa. The interesting thing is these tools are also changing the way we think. There is some interesting research on the neuroscience of tool representations. It turns out that if I get a tool, my sense of space, for example, can change. Normally we distinguish between near and far. Near things are the ones that I can easily grasp, and then there are far things somewhere out there in the remote world. And we seem to use different brain areas even to represent these ones. But if I'm given a tool, like a rod, suddenly things which were previously far become near. And I could very well imagine that running something using remotely like telepresence and robot has exactly the same effect. Some of the experiments, for example, about fooling the people to believe they're in another body thanks to the various forms of illusions or telepresence seems to suggest that we're very good at changing our representations of not just the environment but ourselves because we have the tools. And of course, sometimes we incorporate tools. It might be dental filings or my friend Todd's implanted magnet that gives him a magnetic sense. And his magnetic sense is kind of riding piggyback on his normal tactile sense, because when the magnet is moving, it activates the same nerve endings that would normally be activated by touch. But because it's behaving differently from touch, it also produces a new, different experience. So it seems that he's actually getting a different experience from touch now from the magnet. He's having a new sense. So the problem is, of course, once we see a tool, well, then if it's a hammer, every problem becomes a nail. They potentiate certain actions because they make it possible. So I can skin my avatar in this virtual reality environment. That means that I'm very likely to try to do that. It's very hard to actually resist if there is an option. And that again comes back to the ethics of these extended minds. If we extend ourselves in certain directions, we're also going to have a hard time resisting that. Similarly, of course, we also get this paradoxical situation that more and more advanced technology allow us to start long causal change. I press a button and that sends a message to somebody in another land, and he recognizes my credit card number and does again a long complex interaction with various banks, and then he sends me something using another complex organization. So a single button press, or at least a few button presses, can produce an enormously complex set of causal events for me. Back in the old days, I would have needed to go somewhere to talk to somebody to get them to give me whatever goods I was buying now over internet. The downside of this control and these enormously long causal chains is of course that you also get very far away side effects. And these side effects are making us quite information stressed, as Francis Heilichen pointed out. But the most interesting thing is, well, where does our conceptual edge of our body go? Well, it's based really